Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Soulcast Media live event. It is so fantastic seeing everybody. I was typing behind the scenes here and just of course, saying hello to you all and welcome. If this is the first time you are joining one of our Soulcast Media live events, I'm so thrilled that you are here. And so, to make sure all the tech is working, because sometimes you never know, if you can hear me, please give me a thumbs up on your end. You can just hit the thumbs up or the clap button. I think it should be somewhere on your screen, whether you're watching on a desktop or a phone. Just give me a thumbs up so I know all the audio and tech is working. So, again, for those who are joining our Soulcast Media Live for the first time, welcome. I host these about twice a month or so. And to be honest, it's one of my highlights because it is a great way for me to meet you all, chat with you all, because if this is the first time, or if you've been joining us for the last few times, I see, Becca, you've been to, is it my fourth? I keep these so conversational, so fun and engaging. And you know that because I always ask you all to leave your comments, leave your questions in the chat, because as much as this is a conversation between me and my guest, it's also a conversation with you. And I want you to feel like you are part of this conversation, which, by the way, today we are talking about purpose beyond the paycheck. Now, before I dive into today's topic, I want to do a quick intro of who I am if this is the first time we are meeting. My name is Jessica Chen, and I am the founder and CEO of Soulcast Media, and we are a communications training company. I'm so honored to say that I've trained now over 2 million people how to become more confident communicators. But prior to Soulcast Media, I used to be on TV. That was my career. I was a television journalist, ABC, NBC. I was in New York for a few years, hopping around to all these cities because that's in our career. That's kind of how you rise up. My last stop was at the ABC station in San Diego, California. For those of you who know Anchorman, a lot of people say, oh, Anchorman, San Diego, California. This is true. I was working at the ABC station out there, and it was actually where I won an Emmy Award. So I always tell people it's funny because after I won that award, it was this career realization where I was like, I could go down this path of TV, news for the rest of my life, or I could take this award and take it as a sign that let's do something a little bit different. And that is why I decided to start Soulcast Media because I realized that there was so much that I learned on TV about communications that I could teach it to ambitious professionals like you every day. So I'm a top voice on LinkedIn on presentation skills. And again, like I said, I've taught over 2 million people. So anything communications related, you can trust that you're at the right place, which is interesting because today we're talking about purpose beyond the paycheck, which is a little different from a lot of my talks where I'm usually talking about public speaking skills, advocating for yourself. But I also think today's topic is quite important. My guest and I, who I'm going to introduce in just a few minutes, behind the scenes, we were talking about how, for a lot of us ambitious folks, we get so hyper focused on our career, right? What's that next step? We climb that ladder, whatever ladder that is, because we're waiting for that next promotion, that next level, that next assignment. But sometimes along the way, we get these I call it, these moments where we're like, wait a second. What the heck is happening here? Am I happy at work? Is this what I really want to do? Do I feel fulfilled? Now, wherever you are in your career right now, sometimes you may be getting that inkling, or maybe you're really happy with your work. But I do think this idea of finding purpose is part of finding happiness in the workplace. So, we're going to be talking about all that. So, with that, let's get started. I am thrilled to invite my guest here today. Her name is Regina Lawless. You may have heard of her. She is the former head of DEI at Meta, formerly Facebook, but now she's doing her own thing. And her story, honestly, is very amazing. And I'm very excited to bring Regina up to share her story and just talk about all things purpose beyond the paycheck. So, with that, Regina, welcome to Soulcast Media Live.
Thank you, Jessica. I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I introduced you very briefly, but do you want to introduce yourself and the work that you do for those who might not know you? We'd love to get to know a little bit more about you.
Yes, absolutely. So, as you stated, my name is Regina Lawless. I was actually the former head of DEI at Instagram, which is Meta, of course, is the parent company. I left Instagram slash Meta end of May, and that was kind of the end of a long corporate career, almost 20 years in HR, where I had kind of risen up the ranks to eventually become an HR executive. And had the pleasure of working for some tech titans in the industry, Intel, Micron Technology, Meta, of course, and kind of now am the CEO and founder of Bossy and Blissful, which is a wellness community and a coaching community for women of color, particularly Black women executives.
I love it. So what I found so fascinating about your career, Regina, and it's like kind of what I mentioned earlier, right? Many of us from a very young age, we were conditioned to go to a university, for example, graduate, get a good degree, get a good job, right? And just kind of slowly work your way up for the next 30 or 40 years or however it is, right? Invest in your 401k and then retire happy, whatever it is that they say. But, life sometimes has a different plan for us, for better or worse. And sometimes it can hit us straight in the face where we're like, oh my God, what the heck is going on here? And I want to get your story and kind of like your own experience of pivoting from, an amazing career in corporate to now doing your own thing. But before we even get to your story, I want to start off by talking about communications a little bit, because communications, regardless of what industry you're in, whether you are in tech, finance, healthcare. By the way, for those who are joining us right now, type into the chat function. I would be very curious to know, what industry are you in right now? Are you in tech, finance, healthcare? Are you in Are you in engineering? Let us know in the chat function. I always like to see where folks are dialing in from, including location and industry. But communications, I always say, is a universal skill. So you're telling me, Regina, that you actually studied communications in university, of course, before you started working. So can you tell us a little bit more about, why did you even decide to study communications?
Yeah, so I do. I have my bachelor's in communication studies from Cal State University, Sacramento. Go Sac State! I'm a huge proponent of state schools. It's funny, similar to you. Well, maybe I had a vision that was similar to your path, Jessica. I actually wanted to be a journalist. That was what I started. That was my entry career into college, or that was my initial choice. And then I had a journalism class that was not great for a variety of reasons. I think we all have that class in college that's disappointing. And so it led me into figuring out what else I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to somehow speak or present. And so I ended up pursuing communications with a minor in PR. And even though I ended up, which is like many people, right? Your job is far from what you actually majored in. But I find, even though I ended up in HR, the training and the experience that I gained in the communication studies field helped me every day, particularly as an executive, because your role is to try to communicate a vision to the organization or your team, and you have to influence. That's really the only way you're going to be able to get your goals accomplished. So communication studies, I'm thankful, even though I didn't pursue that as a career, I'm thankful I had that training.
I love it. And isn't that funny? It's sometimes what we study in college is completely different. By the way, I'm seeing where a lot of folks in the industry, a lot of you are coming from finance, healthcare, consulting, higher education, real
Nice.
estate. This is amazing. And I love the diversity because I think we can all of us here right now can agree. And yes, we are live. We can all agree that regardless of what industry you're in, it's about communications. And so the funny thing is for me, I didn't study communications, even though I now teach communications, even though I went into journalism. I studied international relations because actually my dream was to be a international correspondent for CNN. This was when
Ooh,
I was like 18 years old, and that was the dream. And I kind of got halfway there, and then I was like, wait, let me do Soulcast Media instead. And I'm
awesome.
curious for those of you who actually have been writing in the chat, was your major what you're doing right now? And you can just say yes or no, or even just let us know what you majored in. And I always find it so fascinating whether people are pursuing what they had intended to when they were like 18, 19, 20 years old to wherever they are now. Let us know. For any of you who have, I mean, that is amazing. So let us know in
Uh,
the chat function. But going back to communications, Regina, I love teaching this because even though we call it communications, at the end of the day, it's a lot of it is just human relations, right? That's what
right.
communications is. It's knowing how to work with people. So Regina, for you, did you find that when you first started working, that communicating well in the workplace came very naturally to you? Did you know how to navigate all those sometimes tricky relationships? How did you think about that?
Yeah, so what came naturally to me was connecting with people. So I am a kind of a people person. I'm an innate relationship builder. So I can relate well to people, but that is very different than communicating a message broadly and making sure that that message is understood and can be acted upon. So when I started my career, so I started working for Target was my first job out of college. They recruited me, and that's what got me into HR. And then quickly thereafter, I was at Mervyn's, which I still all the. I don't know, for those watching wherever you are, Mervyn's was a beloved like Northern
Yes.
California retailer that is now defunct. Like my heart. I still love Mervyn's. But that's where I started to get corporate experience. And I was an HR business partner, and I had to communicate kind of two ways, like one on one with executives, trying to convey to them certain policies or help them with try to really influence them to do the right things for their employees and in the interest of the company. So that's a different, like, one to one influence that I
Mhm.
had to learn to marry my ability to connect with my ability to influence. So that I had to learn through much trial and error and being told no and, and not able to move my agenda. But then also I had to do presentations. So often as the
Mhm.
HR person, you have to do like when it's like open enrollment, you're going to do the benefits presentation. And I remember I was terrible giving presentations. I was like the person who was like looking over my shoulder at at the slides on the screen, nervous, like all the filler words,
Yeah.
all like you name it, all the bad ways you can communicate. That was me. And I had a fantastic mentor that first had the courage to tell me that, like, well, it was both courage on my part to ask for feedback and courage for him to honestly say that I was terrible. He said it much nicely, much more nice than that. But then he gave me pointers and gave me, most importantly, opportunity to actually practice my presentation more. So it did not come natural. It definitely took training and experience.
I don't think you're alone though. I think many of us here, many of us weren't born natural presenters, including myself, because it's just unnatural to get up in front of people and start talking with dozens of eyes on you. Like it almost feels like you're being judged.
Yeah.
It's like nobody likes to be in that position. Yes, there certainly are people who, they're very charismatic, right? And they can get up in front of people, wow the audience, but I would feel like for the majority of us, it wasn't like that. And I had to learn it on the job too. Regina, what would you say? And I'll share my own tip. If there was one piece of like communications tip that you would share with folks, that because I feel like you're a very genuine, authentic, kind communicator. Like, and I know, we met not too
Thank
long
you.
ago, but just, the feeling and impressions matter, right? And I feel like the feeling that you give to people is like you are a very warm and genuine communicator. So if there was a one tip that you would share with somebody about how they can be a more effective speaker, what would it be? And I'll share my own thoughts first so you can think about this. But when I think about communications, the best advice I always give people is to not think of them through and as their title. I think for many of us, we can easily get so hyper focused. Although I'm speaking to the senior VP, the
Mhm.
executive, that it's as if they're not people themselves. And I think for me, growing up in a very traditional Eastern household, hierarchy was very important, right? You speak to your elders a certain way, and when I went into the working world, I was like, oh, I have to speak to my boss a certain way, but it's like you kind of forget the humanity of it sometimes. So for me, I would say that's what I always like to remind people. It's like, don't get hyper focused on you speaking to the executives, the C suite folks. Think of them as people and how you can add value to what they're doing already. But for you, Regina, what would be something that you would share with folks?
I love that advice. Oh gosh, so many things. I would say that, and you triggered this when you mentioned how you perceive me as a speaker, and thank you for that, for those kind words. I would say I had to find that authenticity by being true to myself, bringing some elements of myself into how I communicate. And so that's my tip. Oftentimes, and you just mentioned this, Jessica, that you're told that you have to comport yourself a certain way. And I had a boss who was trying to prep me to give a presentation to a senior VP of a huge business unit. And he wanted to discourage me from smiling or like even showing any kind of humor. And that's who I am. I smile, I have a lightness about me. And for a long time, I was trying to emulate, particularly I worked in tech. It's,
Yeah.
male dominated. And I was trying to communicate like the male leaders who I worked with. And that just never, it was inauthentic. So that would be my tip. If you can find, that doesn't mean that you're not polished and
Yeah.
professional, but if you're naturally warm or you naturally have a sense of humor, or like find ways to let that come out while still being polished and presenting clearly and effectively. So that would be my tip.
I love that. And I think this is one of those communications things that I think I'm happy we're talking about that, being a clear and confident communicator does not mean you cannot add your personality to it. I think sometimes, like you mentioned this already, like your boss was like, act a certain way, be more stiff. But to me, that's not that engaging to tell you the truth. I find myself really leaning into conversations where I feel like the communicator, the person speaking, has that warmth and that genuineness, versus you see those communicators who are very stiff and very monotoned, right? Sometimes it feels so robotic. And I feel like if I could encourage anybody to challenge themselves in any sort of way to become a better communicator, it's like, don't shy away from showing that smile, right? And just showing that warmth in your communications, even in presentations, even in team meetings, because people, I think people are attracted to that. People want to see a bit of personality, in my opinion. So,
I agree.
yeah.
I think so.
All right. So, one of the things that I want to talk about, which is today's topic, is this purpose beyond the paycheck. And for all of us who are dialed in right now, and there's actually many of you here right now, which is amazing to see, dialing from all over. There's a reason why I think you're here, because maybe this is something you're thinking about too. It's like, how can I find that purpose and happiness at work? And I want to kick off this part of our chat today by having you, Regina, if you're open to it, sharing your story, because you mentioned you were working, going from big company to big company, kind of moving up that ladder, and then life kind of like, I guess, came in and kind of gave you this like reality check of like, wait a second, what the heck is happening here? So yeah, Regina, do you want to share your story of like how you think also about purpose at work today?
Yeah, so I, like many professionals, was very focused on growing my career. And for me, particularly as a woman of color, my experience was not linear. I found that I wasn't always given those opportunities freely to showcase my skills. So I had to get really strategic about making opportunities for myself. So that meant volunteering for extra assignments. That meant really putting in extra hours, traveling, commuting long hours to go work for the bigger companies where I could be exposed to more complex business, industries, and really learn just across different industries, which I've had the pleasure to do over my career. And so with that though comes a lot of pressure, comes a lot of striving, comes a lot of just always feeling like you have to be on and do more and be better. And that led me to success. Like, right, I was head of DEI for Instagram, which is a huge accomplishment and such an honor to get to that stage of my career. But I found myself not being fulfilled. So I'd gotten into the room. I'd gotten into, achieved the status that I wanted in my career. But day to day, it was such a grind. And I found that I had gotten away from what really motivated me, which was helping people, which is what I kind of fell in love with HR to begin with, was the ability to actually help real people grow their careers. And so I call it the whispers. I think our soul whispers to us. And so I had these whispers along the way, like sitting in traffic or, sitting in line at Starbucks waiting for my coffee, like, something doesn't feel right. Like I'm just not fully happy. And then 2 years ago, life threw a curveball at me and my husband. He passed away suddenly from a heart attack. And so my husband Al was, the centerpiece of my world. Like, we had been together since I was 18 years old. We have a son together. We, built this beautiful life together. And so when he died instantly, that just I could no longer ignore the whispers, right? Because it was like, okay, there's a lesson in all of this. And before I could find the lesson, I had to find the space to just heal and um, kind of have that time to figure out what my purpose was, because I lost all sense of what I wanted to do with my life. And so that really kicked off this journey for me of finding purpose beyond chasing that corporate ladder, chasing that corporate paycheck. And that led me to write a book. My book, Do You, will be coming out in February on Fast Company Press. And it really talks about this journey of how I did that soul searching, and ultimately losing my husband was the catalyst for me to figure out um, how to find meaning beyond just the corporate meetings and the rat race. And that really is, for me, purpose beyond paycheck. And you can find this within your job if you look for it, if you're intentional. You can also find it, of course, outside of your job. But for me, purpose is, what is your soul yearning to do? What is your purpose in this lifetime? And are you doing that? Are you living into that? And that's what I eventually found as a result of that tragedy.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I can't, I think, when I think about in all the people who are listening right now, sometimes it doesn't have to be a situation like that for you to kind of be like, oh my gosh, right? And it's not that we have to then go out and start our own company. It's not like that's like a way to
Oh,
find purpose. I feel like for many of us, we can still find purpose in our everyday work, because maybe you are happy in your current company, you are happy in your current role. Yes, sometimes the day-to-day grind can get at you and you're like, gosh, you can be sitting in Starbucks and you're like, wait a second, I'm really tired. Like, I really don't want to be going to work today, right? But I feel like, yeah, it's not that we're saying go out and start your own thing, but it's like, how can you find meaning in the little things? And I feel like even right now, as because I'm also an entrepreneur too, work can, like, the work that we do, that I do every day, can be very tiring. But it's like, how can you find that those little gems of a moment where you're thinking, yes, I might be looking at this spreadsheet and I'm wondering what's the purpose behind this spreadsheet, right? For example. But like, Regina, what would you say if people are feeling like, well, I'm not going to leave my company, like I genuinely do like, and I like the people I work with, but how can I add a little bit more dose of happiness or purpose in my everyday work? Like, would there be anything that you would share with folks so they can, at least think of it a little bit more differently?
Yeah, first and foremost, what I learned is to make space. Like, we fill up our days with so much stuff. Like, I found that I was getting up before 6 a.m., or actually getting up probably around 5 to get on the road by 6 a.m. to commute. This was, of course, bygone days, pre-COVID era, where that was the norm. But my days were so filled, like, with work, with scheduling doctor's appointments, with getting homework for my son, like all the things that we often find ourselves doing. I had no space to even think about what would give me more purpose. I was running on autopilot, like I think so many of us are. So I would say that's the first thing, is to give yourself space to let your mind wander, to relax. For me, I found through, I had 3 months of bereavement leave after my husband died. And that was the first time in my career, other than taking a month off, or taking, like, I had a month leave for a medical issue. Um, but I really hadn't had time outside of like medical leave to really think and be. And so, and I'm not suggesting you take 3 months off, but if you can even find time at during your lunch hour to go for
Yeah.
a walk or meditate. I started a meditation practice during that time, that just even 5 minutes sometimes, to just let my mind wander. So I would say that's the first thing, is to make space so that you can even start to tune in to what is working, what isn't working. And then at work, there's so many ways to get involved. Like, if your day-to-day job is not as fulfilling, there's always other teams, other
Yep.
like people that have projects that might interest you. From a DEI standpoint, almost every company has an employee resource group. So sometimes it's even just finding community within people who share a similar background, or share a similar belief as you. You can find purpose and meaning in that within the workplace.
I agree. And I think maybe it's not in the to-do list. The purpose is not in the to-do list that we have to accomplish every day, but it is like the time that we carve out to connect with other people that can, fill our hearts a little bit and make us a little bit more happy, right? In the workplace too. You mentioned volunteering as a great place to expand the people, the influence you can have. Because yeah, sometimes the daily work can be a grind, right? But if you look beyond just the work and the people who perhaps are in your group, on your team, or even in another department, I have found that purpose usually, and this is for me, is usually aligned to growing in some area. I feel like it's hard to feel like you have purpose if you are stagnant. And it's
Mhm.
easy to feel stagnant in the workplace. So for me, I remember there was a point in my career as a TV journalist where I felt like I was doing the same kind of work, where it was like you go in, you check in, you're doing the same thing. It just got like very robotic in some way. And so we all know in the workplace, you can't always expect people to hand you opportunities. You can't expect people to always think about you. Sometimes you got to carve out that opportunity for yourself. So I remember there was a pivotal moment. This was when I was working in New York. And I was like, you know what? yes, I do. The work that I do is fine. Like I'm enjoying covering the stories on TV, but I want to learn something else. And so I actually decided to create it was a business show. I pitched this idea to launch this business show. And I remember when I pitched it to my boss, he was like, "Well, it's a good idea, but what? We don't have the resources to give you what you want, right? It's always resources. We don't
How
have
is
budget
that?
or time." And you know what I told my boss? I said, it's okay. Like, I'm willing to do it myself and I'm willing to add this onto the work because I want to grow in this area. And I'm just curious, for those of you who are here and listening to this right now, sometimes it's as simple as that. And I remember after I launched that, yes, I was much more busy, but I also felt a lot happier because I was like, I could say this was mine, right? I did it from the beginning till the end and it was my own. So sometimes having that ownership is purpose.
Absolutely. And you just said something beautiful. Like, I firmly believe there is power in the pilot. So, like, there's power in piloting something because a lot of times in corporate, there aren't resources to fully scale up a program. But I've rarely seen someone say, no, you can't pilot something. And so, right, especially if the resource is your own time and energy. And then you can kind of get some grassroots momentum from other people. So, absolutely, I think that is a great way just to try something and to stretch and grow because you're right. If you're if you're stagnant, it's so easy to lose what your purpose is, or if you're not using your strength. I also believe our purpose is intertwined with what our natural talents are.
Mm.
And so I had found in corporate, I had gotten to a point in my career where I was no longer an individual contributor. So some of the things that made me successful, some of the things I learned to do as an individual contributor, I had gotten away from as an executive. So sometimes it's just going back to doing some of the work yourself and working in your area of strength. Creating, like, I love to facilitate and train, and I love to create content. I'm highly creative, and I found I got to a point in my career where yes, I had influence to make decisions, but I wasn't able to kind of build the thing and experiment and create. And so I looked for opportunities to do that. So I would say, look, what's your talent naturally, and see if that can give you a sense of purpose too when you're finding opportunities to use that in your work.
Right. And I mean, how easy is it for us to feel burned out when we're told to do something that we're not good at, right? It's
Mhm.
harder for you, it's more frustrating for you. And yes, that's the recipe for burnout, right? So it's kind of being able to know yourself, what you're naturally good at, and wanting to maybe even double down on that, right? Kristen is saying the power of piloting. You're so right because what manager is going to say no to a piloted idea? Like they're like, okay, fine, if you
Right?
want to do it, sure.
They're like, free labor? Like, you I don't have to give any money. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah. I don't need to take out anything from my budget, or and you're going to do it on top of the work. Sure, you do it, and we'll see how it goes. Right. Um, talking about talent and what we are naturally talented in and kind of doubling down on that to find purpose in the work that we're doing. I would say another one, and this is, of course, closely aligned to talent, is also, what do we find value in, right? And, I know there's tons of exercises out there where you can do like an evaluation to identify your values. And it's not like we're going to be really doing that right now, but, just thinking about what you find value in. Is it talking to people? Is it going out there? Is it growing in some area, right? Um, for you, Regina, how do you think about aligning values and the things you care about to the work that you're doing? And for people who, I guess, might not have thought about values and their everyday work, how do you think about it for yourself? And as you kind of share that, like, I think this could be an inspiration for people for how they can think about what is it that they care about and applying it into their everyday work.
Yeah, so I would say two of my core values. One is growth. like learning and growth, not only for me personally, but helping other people grow. And then justice and particularly kind of equity and social justice. So I started my career, as I mentioned, in HR as an HR business partner. And so I got a chance to use that value of growth because I took a lot of pride, and especially as I pivoted my career in HR within learning and development and talent management, I got a chance to flex that growth value. But then I started to see DEI as a path, and I started to get excited. I was heading up talent management and learning development, and had a chance to take over a women's leadership development program. And I loved it. I loved that we were investing in helping women leaders succeed and bringing more parity within the executive ranks. And so that, for the first time in my career, I felt really strongly met that value I have around social justice and equity. And that really comes from a little girl growing up in an environment that was inequitable. I kind of talk about this a little bit in the book. I grew up in East Palo Alto, a little town in Northern California that was underserved, under-resourced, but borders Palo Alto, one of the most affluent zip codes in the country. And so when you grow up seeing that inequity firsthand, it makes you question why is that, and what can people do to create more access and opportunity for everyone. And so DEI was the fulfillment of that, of like, wow, okay, I'm super passionate about seeing people who are underrepresented by no fault of their own. Like I find that, most people in the workplace come there to do the very best job they can. But workplaces are a microcosm of society. And so there are structures that are set up where it's not an equal playing field. And so the fact that I got a chance to be in DEI and help to remove some of those, help to bring awareness to some of those invisible structures, and then help to remove them, that was amazing. So I would say, if you're in your career, if there's an area that you have a value around, and normally that stems from kind of childhood or early influences, yeah, I would say see if there's a way that you can do that within your career, even if it's just trying something out, even if it's volunteering, or if it's in conjunction to your career. If you want to volunteer to do something outside of work, a lot of people find fulfillment, and that's a way to balance. That's a way to counterbalance the burnout and stress of your career, if you can find something outside that lives into your values.
What you just said reminds me of, I feel like a lot of these aha moments come through when we see something that isn't aligned the way we think it should be. So you mentioned for you, you grew up. So I'm from the Bay Area as well, Regina. I grew up in Fremont, so I know
All
very much
right,
the East Palo Alto, you know, and for you, it was seeing the difference of growing up in East Palo Alto, but you're literally right next to the most affluent zip codes in the country. And you're like, wait a second, something here is, you can see the contrast basically, right? It reminds me of my own story of like why I do the work that I do. So I mentioned I started out as a television journalist, and how it was very hard for me actually in the beginning, because I am naturally more timid and shy and introverted. I think that's just like my nature, personality wise, and also culturally. Culturally, for example, I wasn't taught to speak up. I was always taught to, kind of put my head down, do the work. People will just recognize you. You don't have to speak up. And it was a huge culture shock to me when I entered the working world, because suddenly I was surrounded by all these loud, charismatic, broadcast journalists. And I was known as the quiet Asian girl, right? That's kind of how I was seen. And so for me, I saw that contrast as well. And that was kind of like the catalyst for me to go, wait a second, I need to be more strategic with my communications. Otherwise, I'm not going to be visible. So kind of like similar to you and you getting into that DEI work to help build that bridge. For me, I started teaching communications because I wanted to build that bridge between the people who may be more quiet to the expectation in the workplace where you have to be more loud, and it's like, how do you bridge that gap a little bit? So your
I love
story just
that.
reminded me of like how sometimes the best ideas come from seeing these contrasts in life a little bit, right? So
So true.
I want to by the way, I want to say for all of you who are watching right now, if you have any questions for us, and I feel like we're getting like really like deep into like the feelings talk a little bit, but I do think this is a very refreshing kind of conversation that, maybe like for me, I haven't had a conversation like this in quite a while, and it feels so good for the soul to have, and honestly, thanking you, Regina, for, giving us the opportunity to have this conversation. But for those who are listening, if you have any questions for either me or Regina, please throw it into the chat function. Actually, I think Rebecca's asking the title of your book, actually.
Yes. So the title is Do You, A Journey of Success, Loss, and Learning to Live a More Meaningful Life.
It comes out next year, correct?
Comes out in February 2024.
Oh, I know the book struggle though. I'm currently in the process right now, knee deep in writing, and gosh, it is such a journey. So I'm very excited for you, Regina. Your book is coming out really soon. So
Yeah, the writing that's half the battle. Now I'm learning that I have to actually market the book to get people to want to read it. So that's the struggle I'm in now, trying to figure out how to get my message out there. And this, thank you, Jessica, because this every time I get a chance to talk about my career and my journey, that's an opportunity to share the message. So thank you.
and isn't that what it is? Is like sometimes you finish a big project and you're like, until I get to the end, I can relax. And you're finally like, okay, I can relax. I finished. But you're like, wait a second, there's a whole nother beast that I have to tackle, right? And like I'm actually not done. But I think it's all perspective though, right? It's like, yes, there's a sense of accomplishment that you finished something great. And this is for any of us, really. Like you finish a big project and it's like celebrate that. I always say celebrate that. I'm a huge celebrate the little things, honestly. That's how for me, that's how I feel like we keep going, and then you feel energized to move on to the next thing, right? So
Yeah, celebrate the heck out of that thing, especially if you're an overachiever. Like, I don't know about you, Jessica, but I'm like a chronic overachiever. I used to be. I'm a recovering people pleaser and overachiever. I like to say, but it's easy to just check things off and not really celebrate that you did a hard big thing. So I'm basking in doing a really hard thing of writing a book, and to your point, now shifting my perspective, like, okay, the next thing on that I need to accomplish is really connecting that message to the people who need to hear it, who are meant to hear it.
I love it. So we do actually have a few questions that just came in that I definitely want to get
Okay.
to. So the first one is, and I'll definitely share my thoughts too. What's the best way to start a conversation regarding next career step? Because it's a balance, right, between being pushy but waiting around is also, it's not going to happen either. So Regina, since you've worked in the corporate environment for many years, it is an art sometimes to have this conversation, which can be a tricky conversation. So would you have any career tips in terms of when you feel ready for that next step, but how do you address this conversation with, let's say, your manager, and maybe you have a personal experience of how you also like to engage in these conversations too?
Yeah, I believe in transparency. So I've always been one that has communicated with my manager of what my intent was, what my growth plan is, because I'm so motivated to grow and learn. Now it helps when you're doing your current job well. Fun
Number
fact
one.
number one. And that's an easier conversation when you're actually hitting the mark in what you're supposed to be doing. But assuming that you're performing well in your current job, I personally have always gone to my managers, and not just the annual performance conversation. By that point, I think it's too late. Like in regular one-on-ones, I regularly would say, "Hey, I'm like so." perfect example. When I worked for Virgin America, I was an employee relations manager. And so my job was all about dealing with crisis and when employees had performance issues or conduct issues. But that's when I started to figure out that I had a passion for learning and development and training and facilitation. So I had these regular conversations with my boss around, hey, I'm really interested in learning how to be a facilitator. And so I just brought that up in one-on-ones with her and kept bringing it up to the point where she actually started to help me look for opportunities. And so between her and I, she reached out to her peer, which was the head of learning and development, and introduced us. I met with her, and then I told that leader that, hey, if you ever have an opportunity where I can shadow your team, which that led to them allowing me to co-facilitate a program that they were piloting. So back to pilot. So I got a chance to pilot some skills in something that they were piloting. And so that's what I would encourage people, just be transparent. Like, it doesn't mean that you don't kind of value your current role or like what you're doing. There's nothing wrong. And I would actually say, as a leader myself, I loved when my team was looking to grow their skills or round out their skill set. So I would say, don't be afraid to just mention, like, hey, I have a passion, I have an interest in this, if there's an opportunity or coming to pitch an opportunity for yourself to try that thing out.
I love it. And I think the key word that I think about is we got to be proactive about this, right? And I think what they don't teach you in school is like you cannot always wait, right? It's not the performance review as a time to ask for it. I think there are many touch points in a year that you can say, wait, this actually is a good time. And the good time is usually when you maybe have finished a big project and you know you did well. Like, I always think that's a good time to start the conversation. But I would also say, right, if you are engaging in the conversation, let's say your manager says no, or maybe not now, it does not mean it's the end. It's just the beginning of the conversation. Because it's true, maybe the timing is not right now. But I think you starting it and not expecting that yes is also how you can almost protect yourself a little bit, because sometimes when we're told no and we get shocked by it, it's like, oh, we tried but they rejected us, and then we can take it very personally. But I always say, don't take no as like a rejection in that way or a reflection on you. Take it as like, okay, it's the first step to eventually getting what you want. I always think that's huge.
Absolutely. It's persistent. Like, that opportunity for me didn't happen overnight. It was me being persistent and continuing to talk to my boss and anyone who would listen about what I was interested in.
So, one of the other questions, and this is one for you specifically, Regina, this is from Lisa. So, have you had roles where you felt your own values were not exactly aligned with the organization? So, your values did not align necessarily with the organization's. And then, how did you handle that? That's tricky. And yeah, what are your thoughts about this?
That's really tricky. And I definitely have an experience. And I don't know that, so take this for what it's worth. I don't know that I did it, the right way, but it was right for me in a sense. So I had an organization that just was a very, I want to say toxic, for lack of a better word, and toxic in the sense that it was very cutthroat. People were very like hyper focused on competing with one another and were not about helping you succeed, or even the company for that matter. It was very individually focused on being successful. And that environment didn't align with my values of community and helping and growth. And so I tried my first attempt was to try to make it work, try to adapt to the culture. But I went home feeling empty every day. And sometimes I cried, like driving home. It was such a, like, just deeply disturbing environment to be in. And so ultimately I decided to self-select out. Like, that is one where I just couldn't continue to put myself in that every day. And so that was my solution. I know that for everybody, you can't just up and leave your job. But for me, it just wasn't working for me to work within those. And I tried to do lots of different things, even try to build a small community within that company. But just the culture was just it was more than I could bear. So yeah.
Yeah, and your story isn't um that unusual, and I say this because I feel like I experienced similar. There was one company that I did work for early on that it felt very about it was all politics, and gosh, like, that is so frustrating, like, all
Yeah.
politics, all favoritism, and I felt like no matter how hard I worked, no matter how hard I challenged myself, that the manager that I had at the time just that manager selected their favorites, and it was always about that, and it was very demoralizing, and same thing, I cried, and this was when I was fairly young, and I just didn't understand like work. I felt like, it was a mentality of like, don't you just work hard? No, it's
Right.
not like it's yeah, it's like, oh, okay, there's a game that's happening here. And again, they don't teach you this in school. But similar after trying and trying and trying, like I was like, I felt like I couldn't take it either. So I created my own exit strategy
Smart.
and yeah, right, and it's like I prepared for that next thing, and sometimes we have to do that, right, and it's okay. Just giving ourselves the time to find that next thing um, can help. So, by the way, we're about to wrap up here. I felt like this conversation just like zoomed
Flew
past.
by.
So as we kind of wrap up here, Regina, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for joining and just engaging in this honestly very meaningful conversation. And for all of you who stayed this entire time, hopefully this was an inspiration and motivation for you to kind of think about your work a little bit differently. Hopefully it can kind of get you thinking about this purpose beyond the paycheck. So, Regina, for those who want to follow you and stay in contact with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yes, well, definitely LinkedIn at Regina Lawless. So for sure, if we haven't connected, please let's connect. Also on Instagram at Regina.Lawless. Also at Bossy and Blissful on Instagram. And those are my main channels. But yeah, please connect. I'm going to start communicating more. I'm gonna take a page from your book, Jessica, and so I find as an entrepreneur, you have to get yourself out there more. So if you connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram, you'll start to see more from me in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, it's funny because even though I teach communications, I always have to remind myself it's all about proactive communications. And even though there are some certain days where you're just like, I'd rather just not post or or
I
I'd
feel
rather
it.
just do something else. You're like, no, like if you have something valuable to say it. So, one quick announcement for those of you who are joining. I'm super excited to share with you all that I'm actually hosting a masterclass next week. It's going to be a 3-day masterclass called Professional Communication Skills. I could not think of a more creative title, to be honest with you. So it's called Professional Communication
The
Skills,
point.
but it's what it is. I'm hosting this next week, and it's going to be actually a 3-day event, just 1 hour a day, where I'm going to be going live. It's not going to be on LinkedIn, so you actually have to register for it. So if you're interested, I'm actually going to just drop the link right now in the chat. Um, Go into that link, register for the event. There is a wait list because it's a free event and we have to limit it. But if you are on the wait list, you get priority access to enroll. This is happening again next week. So we're finalizing this training. I'm going to be teaching public speaking skills, developing executive presence, and it's going to be loads of fun. It's if you have never attended one of my workshops, I highly recommend you check this one out because it's all about communication. So the link's in there. You copy and paste it, register for it because, again, it's happening next week. And if you and I, for those who are here, if we're not already connected on LinkedIn, please connect with me. I host these lives every other week. I have amazing guests like Regina come on and we talk all things communications work. So if you enjoyed this, stay in contact with me. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you, Regina, for being here. Thank you all for staying the entire time and, being in this conversation with us, and again, thinking about purpose beyond the paycheck. So with that, I want to say thank you, and Regina, thank you. I hope we all can stay in contact, and I'll talk to you all soon. All right. Take care, everybody.